The drive out from Fredericksburg took 40 minutes, most of it on Farm to Market Road 1631 with the windows down because the truck's air conditioner had quit somewhere around El Paso a decade back, and I'd never bothered fixing it. Then a turn onto a caliche road that didn't have a name on any county map I'd ever seen, just a mailbox leaning sideways at the cattle guard, and 2 miles of white dust climbing up behind me like I was dragging a cloud. Donald had set the whole thing up. He was my daughter-in-law's brother, sold real estate out of an office in Kerrville with his photograph on a bench bus somewhere. And when my wife died and left me a house with a roof that leaked into the hallway and no income to speak of, he'd called and said he had something. A caretaker position. Quiet property, he said. Empty most of the time. Pays not much, but it's steady. And you know water systems, don't you, driving feed all those years. I parked the truck at the foreman's cottage, a low limestone building set off 50 yards from the main house, and carried my gear in through a door that stuck on the bottom hinge. 1 bedroom, a kitchen with a window over the sink, a porch that faced east across the pasture. I spent that first afternoon learning the water. The whole property ran gravity-fed off a limestone aquifer, the pressure governed by elevation and a row of manual valves in a pump house behind the main house, and I walked the lines until I had the troughs mapped in my head. South pasture, east pasture, the dry one by the old corral that hadn't held water in years. The man who'd owned all this, Gerald Harwick, had died alone on the property the year before last, and his family down in San Antonio ran the estate by fax machine and hadn't once driven out to look at what they owned. That much Donald had told me before I ever signed anything, like it was a selling point. My second morning, I walked the eastern fence line, same as I'd walk any fence line, checking posts and wire, and about a quarter-mile down I found a coyote laid flat in the grass. No blood on it, no wound I could see, and no flies, which in July, in that heat, with a body not an hour old by the look of it, didn't make sense to me at all. I crouched down next to that animal a good while, turning it over with the toe of my boot, and there was nothing. Just a dead coyote lying in good grass like it had laid itself down to sleep. I stood up and walked on, and 12 feet further I found a second one in the same condition. I kept walking after that slower, counting. 7 of them altogether, spaced 10 or 15 feet apart, strung along the fence line in a line that wasn't a coincidence. It pointed straight toward a stone building set back at the rear of the property, half hidden behind a screen of cedar. I stood at the last carcass and looked down that corridor toward it for a long while. Nothing moved out there, no birds on it either, and there should have been birds. I called Donald from the fence line, phone held against my ear with the heat coming up off the ground in waves. Found 7 dead coyotes out on the east fence, I told him. No marks on any of them. No blood. Flies aren't even on them yet. And it's been hot since 6 this morning. Probably poison, he said. Ranchers around there have been known to bait for them. Bag 'em up and call Gillespie County Animal Control. That's the cleanest way to handle it. There's a building back there, I said. Stone 1. They're laid out pointing right at it. Tom, that's the cold storage building. It's locked under probate order. Nobody touches it till the estate clears. You're not to go near it, all right? Just handle the coyotes. I bagged them up in contractor bags, heavy gauge, and carried them out to the end of the Caliche Road one at a time over the better part of an hour. I did not call animal control. What I did instead was walk from the cottage out to that building and count my steps doing it. 340 yards. There was a power line running to it I hadn't noticed from the fence, newer than anything else on the place, strung along a conduit bolted to a row of cedar posts that didn't match the gray, weathered look of every other post on that ranch. The lock on the door wasn't the same either. Every outbuilding I'd seen so far had some old hardware store padlock rusted half shut. This one was a commercial abloy, the kind you see on bank doors. I didn't touch it. I looked at it a minute, then I walked back to the cottage. The weeks after that settled into something close to a routine. Mornings I walked the fences, checked the troughs, cleared cedar brush and dead leaves out of the water where it pooled before flowing on. Twice a week I'd go through the main house and open every window I could to air it out, in case somebody came to look at buying it, though nobody ever did. The place stayed empty and dead quiet except for the cicadas and the wind moving through the cedar, and most days I didn't see another living soul. Every other Wednesday morning, a woman named Brenda Reynolds called from Donnell and Associates, the firm handling the estate. She'd go down my maintenance log line by line in a voice that never changed pitch no matter what I told her, and at the end of every call, without exception, she'd say the same thing. The cold storage building remains off limits. Inventory is pending probate resolution. Yes, ma'am, I'd say, and hang up, and write the date down in my log, same as I wrote everything else. It was somewhere in that second week I noticed the hum. Standing near the building one morning, checking the fence close by it, I picked up a low electrical sound, steady, coming off the building itself. Not loud, but there, the kind of hum you'd hear off a transformer box, except this one didn't quit. I called Donald again that night. What did Harwick keep in that building? I asked him. It's running power like a small plant out there. I don't know, Tom, he said. Nobody from the family's been out. They've handled the whole thing by fax. Honestly, I don't think anybody alive has been inside that building since the old man died. I didn't have anything to say back to that, so I let it go. Tonight the air's still, no wind moving the cedar at all. I'm sitting out on the cottage porch with the lights off and the screen door propped. Across 340 yards of dark pasture, I can just make it out. That same low hum coming off the cold storage building in the dark. I sit there and listen to it. Brenda called Monday morning, right on schedule, 2 weeks to the day since the last one. I had the log open on the kitchen table before she even started talking, the way I always did, but she didn't ask about it this time. The property has sold, she said. Off-market transaction closed over the weekend. Your arrangement with Donnell and Associates will conclude in 1 week. I sat there a second with the pen still in my hand. Who bought it? I'm not able to share that information. Brenda, I've been out here 3 weeks, watering this place and walking that fence every morning. Seems like I'd get told who I'm doing it for. A final check will be mailed to your Fredericksburg address, she said, like I hadn't said anything at all. Thank you for your service to the estate, Tom. Then she was gone, and I sat there with the dial tone for a second before I set the phone down. I didn't think much more about it during the day. I aired out the main house like always, walked the fence, found nothing dead this time, which by then had started to feel like its own kind of strange. By evening, I'd more or less let it go, the way you let go of things you can't do anything about. Then around 10 that night, I was out on the porch with the lights off, same as the night before, and I saw headlights coming up the Caliche Road. A flatbed first, running slow over the washboard ruts, and behind it 2 black SUVs keeping close together like they were roped to it. I didn't move from the chair. They came up past the cottage without slowing, without a horn tap or a hand out a window, and parked in the cleared yard between the main house and the tree line. Men got out of the SUVs, 6 of them, maybe 7, moving with the kind of quiet that told me they'd done this before. They worked the flatbed's ramps down and started rolling things off. Big steel-cased units on wheeled frames, the size of a horse trailer cut in half, with exhaust stacks and fuel ports and handles welded on for 4 men to a corner. Generators. Industrial ones. The kind you see staged outside a hospital during a storm. Not the kind anybody keeps on a cattle ranch. They wheeled them across the pasture toward the cold storage building, one at a time, taking maybe 20 minutes a trip. Nobody talked above a murmur. Nobody looked toward the cottage. I sat in the dark and counted them as they passed, 4 units total, and when the last one had gone bumping off into the dark toward that stone building, the flatbed turned around in the yard and idled back down the road the way it came, headlights swinging once across the porch rail without ever finding me. I went inside after that and didn't sleep much. By morning, the hum had changed. I heard it before I was all the way dressed, coming through the screen with the dawn cool still on the air, and it wasn't the same sound I'd been listening to from the porch for 3 weeks. That one had been thin, a wire on a fence post kind of whine, something you could lose under a mockingbird if you tried. This was under it now, a low, steady push that didn't waver, the kind of sound a diesel makes when it's settled into a load and means to stay there. I walked out to within 50 yards of the building, close as I'd let myself get, and stood in the wet grass listening. The generators were tied in alongside the existing line now. I could see that much. Somebody had spent the night running cable because there was fresh conduit clipped to 2 of the cedar posts that hadn't been there the day before. The sound coming off the building wasn't louder so much as it was deeper, steadier, like whatever had been running on a trickle before was running on a flood now, and somebody had wanted it that way bad enough to drive 2 SUVs and a flatbed up a county road in the dark to make it happen. I called Donald from the cottage kitchen with the window open so I could still hear it. "There's 4 diesel generators out behind the cold storage building that weren't there yesterday," I told him. "Showed up last night, 10 o'clock, flatbed and 2 SUVs. Bunch of men I never saw before. Nobody knocked, nobody said a word to me. Now the whole building's humming different, louder." "Okay," Donald said. The way he says "okay" when he's writing something down he doesn't understand. "Let me look into it." He called back about 4 hours later. "Tom, listen, I talked to some people. The new owner's bringing in a setup crew. That's all this is. You just run out the week, collect your check. Don't worry yourself over it." "Donald, you know what's in that building?" There was a pause on the line, the kind where you can hear a man deciding how much of the truth to spend. "Tyler," he said. And that's the part that stuck, him using my real name instead of Tom, like the conversation had stopped being business and become something else. "I set you up with a maintenance job. That's all I did." I hung up without saying anything back. I walked out across the pasture again that afternoon, past where I'd buried nothing yet because there'd been nothing to bury, all the way up to the building itself this time. The grass around the foundation was beat down flat from boots that weren't mine. I put my palm flat against the limestone wall, cool even in the July heat, and felt it before I heard it. A vibration running up through the stone, steady as a heartbeat. The 2 hums, generator and line, joined into one sound that didn't separate out anymore no matter how I listened for it. I didn't try the padlock. I'd been told once already what that lock was for, and I wasn't looking to find out twice. I walked back to the cottage with the doubled hum of the cold storage building following me across the pasture, louder than it was the night before. I drove to the main house the next morning with my key set on the seat beside me, figuring on a short conversation and a long drive back to Fredericksburg. 2 men were waiting on the porch when I pulled up. The first one came down the steps before I'd even shut my truck door. Mid-40s, solid through the shoulders, dressed like he'd ironed his shirt that morning in a house with no power on yet. He held out his hand. "Nathan Carter, operations manager for the new owner." I shook it. His grip was firm and brief. "Tyler Scott, I brought the keys. We'd appreciate it if you held on to those a little longer." He said it the way you'd read a line off a card, careful, no rough edges on it anywhere. "The new owner would like the property maintained at its current standard while construction permits move through the Gillespie County office. Your work on the water system and the fence lines has been noted. We'd prefer to keep that continuity." I looked past him at the second man, who hadn't come down off the porch. Younger, maybe under 30, his face soft and gray from too many nights without enough sleep. He was watching me like he was working something out and not liking the math. "Eli Johnson," Nathan said. "Site logistics." Eli nodded at me but didn't offer his hand. I told Nathan I'd think on it. He said that was reasonable and went back up the steps, and that should have been the end of it, except Eli came down off the porch after him and walked over to my truck window before I could roll it up. "It's triple," he said, low, like he didn't want the words carrying back to the house. "Triple what Donnell was paying you. Cash. Friday, in an envelope, left at your door. You don't have to do anything but what you're already doing." I had a roof outside Fredericksburg with a stain spreading across my daughter-in-law's bedroom ceiling, and not much reason in the world to turn down good money for honest work. I told him I'd stay on. He nodded like that was the answer he'd expected and went back inside without another word. Nobody mentioned a key to the cold storage building, and I didn't ask for one. Some things you let lie until they come looking for you. That night I sat at the cottage table with my phone and the work order Sean Larson's crew had left clipped to the porch rail, and I looked up the name printed across the top of it: Vericel Site Services. Vericel turned out to be a subsidiary, one line in a longer filing, and the filing led me up a chain to a holding company and then to a name that kept coming up everywhere that chain went: Johnny Salinas. He was a biotech investor out of Austin, the kind of money that gets written about in magazines instead of newspapers. He'd made it in organ preservation, a company called Paragon Biopreservation, the sort of outfit that sounds like it does one ordinary thing and turns out to do something else. I read the profile through twice. Then I found an interview, 3 years old, from a Texas monthly piece somebody had scanned and put online. There was a quote in it, Salinas talking about his work, and I read it slow the first time and slower the second. The human body, he said, was an engineering problem we'd been too sentimental to solve correctly. I set the phone down on the table and didn't pick it back up for a while. 3 days after that, a flatbed came up the Caliche Road hauling a backhoe and a crew of 6 men in Vericel shirts, and they parked at the north pasture where the old hay barn stood. I'd spent 3 weeks of my first month shoring that barn up, replaced rotted sill plates, reset the cross bracing, jacked the whole northwest corner back to plumb a 1/4 inch at a time. It was a sound building. 40s timber frame, mortise and tenon, the kind of joinery nobody bothers cutting anymore because it takes a man who knows what he's doing and time he isn't getting paid for. I went out and found the foreman, a big sunburned man named Sean Larson, standing by the backhoe with a clipboard. "That barn's not coming down," I said. He didn't look up from the clipboard. "It's on the work order." "I don't care what's on the order. I shored that frame myself. It's sounder than the house you're standing in front of." "I've torn down sounder buildings than this one." He said it flat, like weather. "You got a problem with it? Take it up with the owner. I just do what's on the page." I told him that was a hell of a way to run a crew, tearing down good work because somebody who'd never set foot in the building wanted the dirt cleared. He told me that wasn't his call to make, but he waited for me to finish. I said it loud enough that Nathan came out from the main house at a near trot to see what the noise was. He let me say my piece a second time, nodding along like a man reviewing a complaint form. Then he said the permits called for a cleared north pasture, and the barn wasn't part of the structures being retained. That was the end of the discussion as far as the order was concerned. I lost. I knew I'd lost about 30 seconds into saying it. The one thing I got out of him was the plans. Up in the loft, rolled in a cardboard tube going soft at the seams, were the original timber frame drawings, hand-drafted, somebody's grandfather's barn laid out in pencil. I told Nathan those went with me to the cottage and not into a dumpster, and he said that was fine. He didn't care either way, in the same tone he might have used to say it wasn't going to rain. I carried the tube back myself and set it against the cottage wall, and then I went and stood on the porch to watch. It took less than an hour. The backhoe took the south wall first, and the whole frame folded inward on itself once that wall went. Joinery I'd spent 3 weeks tightening, giving up all at once in a long, groaning collapse that ended in dust and a flat brown scar where a building used to stand. The rolled timber frame plans sat in their tube against the cottage wall behind me, the only thing left of it. I heard the helicopter before I saw it, a low chop working its way up from somewhere south of Fredericksburg, and by the time I'd straightened up from the trough valve, it was already coming in low over the south pasture, kicking grass flat in a wide ring before it ever touched down. A Bell, white with a dark blue stripe, worth more than every truck I'd ever driven combined. It set down soft, like the pilot had done it 1,000 times, and a man in pale gray clothes stepped out without ducking his head, which told me he'd flown in plenty before too. That was Salinas. I didn't need Nathan to tell me, though Nathan came out to meet him anyway, walking fast in a way I hadn't seen him walk before. I went back to the trough valve and didn't watch them go into the cold storage building, though I marked the time. 2 hours later, give or take, I saw the three of them come back out. Salinas, Nathan, and 2 men in white coveralls I never got names for and never asked after. The white coveralls men got back into a black SUV that hadn't been there that morning either, and Salinas walked the property like a man inspecting something he already owned outright, which I suppose by then he did. He found me at the trough in the early afternoon. I had the float valve open and was clearing a wasp nest out from under the lip with a stick when his shadow fell across the water. "This feeds off the same shelf as the east pasture trough," he said. Not a question. He had on dark canvas pants and a collared shirt, both of them fitting too well for ranch work, and he didn't look like the heat touched him at all, though it was past 90 by then, and I had sweat through mine an hour ago. "Same limestone, yes sir," I said. "Comes up through a spring about 400 feet that way. Gravity does the rest." "Does the flow rate drop in drought years?" "Some. Not as much as you'd think. That shelf holds water a long time." "And the pressure holds across the whole east run? No booster anywhere along the line?" "No, sir. Never needed one. Old man Harwick had it laid out right the first time." He nodded like I'd confirmed something he already knew, and then he started walking, not fast, not waiting to see if I'd follow, just walking the fence line south to east, the way a man walks a property he's deciding what to do with. I went along because it seemed like the thing to do, and because nobody had told me not to. He asked more questions on the way, about the aquifer depth, about whether the cedar root systems pulled water off the same shelf, about how long the troughs had run without maintenance before I got there. I answered what I knew and didn't pretend to know what I didn't, and he took both kinds of answer the same way, filing them off someplace behind those pale eyes. We came up on the eastern fence line where the coyotes had been laid out that first week, and he stopped there like he'd meant to all along, hands loose at his sides, looking out over the pasture instead of at me. "This is where you found them," he said. "7 of them. Yes, sir." "There's a project in the cold storage building," he said, the way another man might tell you the weather was turning. "A long-term biological preservation effort. Gerald Harwick was part of it before he died. An early believer, an early funder, a man who wanted to be part of something that outlasted him. I've acquired the project. I intend to complete it." I didn't say anything. I'd learned by then that with this man, silence got you further than questions did. "The animals die because the project leaks a trace compound into the surrounding soil," he went on. "Not enough to matter in any practical sense. An acceptable margin." He said it the way Nathan might read off a permit number, no weight on any one word over another. "When you find them, bury them. Don't report it to anyone." Then he turned and walked back toward the main house, and he didn't wait to see whether I'd agreed to it, because as far as he was concerned, there wasn't anything to agree to. I stood at that fence a long while after he'd gone. The word he'd used kept coming back to me, preserved, turning over and over, finding new edges every time. I thought about that abloy lock on a building where every other lock on the property was something you could have bought at a hardware store for $9. The new conduit bolted along the cedar posts caught in my mind too, carrying current to a building that hummed loud enough to hear from the porch on a still night. And there was the company name, Paragon Biopreservation, that I'd read off my phone screen at midnight, tied to something that had been running unattended for 8 years on a dead rancher's pasture in Gillespie County. There was a magazine quote, too, about the body being an engineering problem nobody'd had the nerve to solve correctly. Acceptable margin. I'd hauled cattle long enough to know what that phrase meant when a man used it about anything living. The next morning I found another one on the same stretch of fence, flat in the grass, same as the others. No blood, no flies working it yet, though the sun had been up 2 hours, and they should have found it by then. I crouched down next to it a minute, the way I had the first time, looking for whatever it was that killed them and finding nothing, same as before. I didn't dig a hole. I went and got a contractor bag off the roll in the cottage and came back and bagged it the way I had the first 7, and then I carried the bag to my truck and dropped the tailgate. Tyler lifts the contractor bag with a dead coyote into the bed of his truck, closes the tailgate, and does not call anyone. The knock came hard 3 times, fast enough that I was up out of the chair before I'd decided to be. Eli stood on the porch with no coat on and his breath going ragged in the porch light, the kind of breathing a man does when he's been running or trying not to cry, and it could have been either one. "Power's down," he said. "Backup system's down. I can't reach Salinas. The generators are throwing a fault. I got a key, and I don't know one wire from another out there." "What's in the building, Eli?" He looked at me like the question cost him something to hear. "You need to come now," he said. "Please." I pulled my boots on standing in the doorway and didn't ask again. We walked it without talking, 340 yards I'd counted out weeks before with my own feet and never told a soul, the caliche pale under a half moon and the cedar throwing long black shapes across it. The hum was different that night. Lower. Wrong. The way an engine sounds wrong half a second before it quits on you. And I'd spent enough years behind the wheel to know that sound cold. Eli's hand shook getting the key into the abloy. He had to try twice. The padlock gave with a sound like a rifle bolt, and he hauled the door open, and the cold came out at us sudden and heavy, our breath showing in it before we'd taken a step inside. Red light ran along the floor in a strip, low and dim, emergency lighting, just enough to read by. 8 chambers stood in 2 rows facing each other, stainless and squat, the size and shape of chest freezers laid on their backs, a round window set into the lid of each one, and a panel of readouts mounted at the foot end, glowing faint green in the red. I stood in the middle of the room and counted them. 8. Every panel was lit. Every panel was moving. A heartbeat line dragging slow across the screen, a number for breaths that barely climbed off 0, a thin trace jittering that I didn't need anybody to tell me was a brain working. 8 beats a minute. I knew what a dead man's monitor looked like from the 1 week I sat with my wife in a hospital room watching numbers. And this wasn't that. This was alive. Just barely. Just enough. Eli already had his phone to his ear, talking low and fast to somebody on the other end, words coming out of him in pieces. Fault code, transfer switch. I don't know. Just talk me through it. And he wasn't looking at me, and he wasn't looking at the chambers either. I went to the panel on the far wall. A commercial transfer switch, same housing I'd seen bolted to truck stop generator sheds from El Paso to Texarkana over 20 years of hauling, the same 3 switches in the same order. I had it running again in under 3 minutes. The readouts steadied. The red light along the floor cut out and the white came up hard and clean, and the room looked for 1 second like nothing more than a clean, cold room full of machines. I had my flashlight in my hand from the walk over, and I don't know why I lifted it to the nearest window instead of putting it away. The glass was fogged at the edges and clear in the middle, and through it was a man's face. Gray-skinned, gaunt past anything I'd seen on a living person. His eyes were open and they were moving, slow, tracking something that wasn't me, and his mouth was working, opening and closing without any sound getting through the steel and the glass between us. I stood there looking at him longer than I meant to. I stepped back without thinking and hit the chamber behind me with my shoulder, and I turned, and without thinking about that either, I wiped the fog off that porthole with my sleeve. A hand came up against the glass from the inside, flat. Fingers spread wide, reaching for something it couldn't get to, and it came up so fast on the heel of my hand touching that steel that it was like the thing inside had felt me hit the wall and known exactly where I was. I ran for the door. I didn't get to it. Two men I'd never been introduced to came out of the dark on either side of the entrance and had me by both arms before I cleared the threshold, and they didn't say a word doing it, just turned me around and walked me toward the lights of the main house, my boots barely touching ground between them. And the whole way there I had nothing in front of my eyes but that hand pressed flat against the glass. I came around in a kitchen chair with my wrists zip-tied behind the slats and a fluorescent light buzzing somewhere over my head, and for a second I thought I was still on the floor of that building with the cold coming up through the concrete. Then I felt the chair under me and the tape biting into my wrists, and I knew where I was. Nathan Carter set a manila folder on the table in front of me and opened it without saying anything. Photographs. My truck and my trailer, parked at the auction yard outside Careville, time-stamped in the corner. A trailer behind it that wasn't mine, loaded with cattle that weren't mine either. 14 head, the paper under the photo said, reported stolen the same week. And under that, a bill of sale with my name typed at the top and a signature at the bottom that I never put there. Selling that trailer to some name I didn't recognize in Comfort. The Kerr County Sheriff's Office has been patient, Nathan said. Flat, no weight on any one word. The evidence package is ready to be mailed. Photographs, receipt, a witness statement. He closed the folder. He didn't ask me anything. He just left it sitting there square in front of me and walked over and stood in the doorway with his hands folded. I looked at that folder a long time. I thought about the roof on Donald's sister's place in Fredericksburg, the one I kept telling myself I'd get to before the fall rains. And I thought about Donald putting me out here in the first place with a phone call that started with "you're going to love this" and a property and ended with me sitting zip-tied in somebody else's kitchen. I was at that auction yard buying fence wire. There's a receipt for it somewhere in a drawer at the cottage, creased where I folded it into my shirt pocket. And I knew without anybody telling me that nobody on God's earth was going to care about that receipt once the other one went in an envelope. I sat there a long while with just the hum of the refrigerator and the buzz of that light. Somewhere out past the kitchen window, the sky started going gray and then pale and then full morning. Nobody came and untied me, and nobody came and explained anything. I didn't sleep. I just sat there counting the squares in the tile floor until I lost count and started over. Johnny Salinas came in around what must have been 8 o'clock, dressed like he'd slept fine, and he pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "The men in those chambers are volunteers," he said. "Terminally ill, all 8, when they signed, 8 years ago. Contracts with Paragon Biopreservation, reviewed by an ethics board, executed with their families present in most cases. They chose this. I want you to understand that before anything else." I didn't say anything. Eli was standing back in the corner near the stove with his arms crossed tight over himself like he was cold, and Nathan was still in the doorway, same as before, like he hadn't moved all night. "The reversal protocol is complete," Salinas said. "Validated across the animal trials. Tonight I'm going to wake the first volunteer and confirm it holds in a human subject." He said it the way a man tells you he's got a dentist appointment. "After that, I intend to use it on myself, before I lose the nerve to." Nobody in that kitchen said a word for a second. Then Eli said it, quiet, from over by the stove, not looking at anybody. "The families were told they died during the clinical trial phase." Salinas turned and looked at him for a second. He didn't answer him. He didn't even hold the look long. He turned back to me. Do you have questions about the process? I looked at the folder sitting in front of me, and at Nathan filling up the doorway, and at Eli not looking at any of us, and at Salinas waiting across the table with his hands folded easy, like we were talking about the aquifer again. That man in the nearest chamber, I said. The one I saw through the glass. Does he know where he is? Salinas considered that for a second. He will, he said. Very soon. He stood up and pushed his chair back under the table, neat, and walked out of the kitchen. I sat there zip-tied with that folder still in front of me, Nathan still standing in the doorway, not moving. Nathan came around the table and cut the zip ties with a folding knife, and the blood came back into my hands in a way that hurt worse than the ties had. He didn't say anything about it. He just set the knife down and nodded toward the door like we were headed out to look at fence. The case was waiting in the mudroom, a hard shell thing the size of a footlocker, gray, with 2 latches and a handle on each end. Eli took one end, and I took the other, and we carried it out into the dark, down the porch steps, onto the Caliche Road. Nathan walked behind us with a flashlight he didn't turn on. 340 yards, same as always, except this time I was carrying the thing in my hands instead of counting steps in my head, and neither one of us said a word the whole way. The case wasn't heavy. Whatever was inside it weighed about as much as a tackle box, and it was going to put a man back together or take him apart, and I couldn't tell from the weight of it which. Salinas was already inside when we got there, standing at the nearest chamber with his hands folded the same easy way they'd been folded across the kitchen table. 2 men in white coats stood off to one side, and I understood without being told that these were the technicians nobody had bothered naming for me. The cold hit different this time. The first time I'd come into that room, I'd been too rattled to feel it. Now I felt every degree of it, my breath going to fog in front of my face, same as everybody else's. Eli set his end of the case down on a rolling cart by the chamber, and I set mine down next to it. And Salinas opened the latches like a man unwrapping something he'd been waiting on for years. "This is the compound," he said to the room, to no one in particular, lifting a vial out of a foam cradle and holding it up to the light. "Stored at 4 degrees Celsius. It needs to come up to body temperature before administration, which the case handles automatically, so we wait 90 seconds. He checked something on the case's small screen. 88. 89. Nobody moved. The technicians stood still, watching him without a word. Nathan stood with his arms crossed by the door. Salinas drew the compound into a syringe with the kind of care most men save for threading a needle in bad light, found the injection port set low on the chamber's steel side, and pushed the plunger down slow. 0.3 milliliters per minute, he said. Anything faster risks cardiac shock. We're looking at a window of 6 to 8 minutes to first signs of consciousness, assuming 8 years hasn't changed the math. He said it the way Donald talked about closing costs. The readout on the chamber's face started to climb before he'd even finished talking. 8 beats a minute, then 40. I watched the number go up the way you watch a gauge on a rig you already know is about to blow, that particular stomach drop of seeing it happen and being 3 seconds too slow to do anything useful about it. 70. The chamber gave a shudder against its brackets, metal groaning against metal, and the readout kept climbing past 100. The technicians stepped back first. Then Nathan, 1 step, like he was making room for somebody to pass. Salinas didn't move. He stood right where he was, watching his own calculations come true. The bolts on the lid went off like 4 small gunshots in a row, and the lid swung up and slammed against its hinge, and the man inside sat up. He was gray the way ash is gray. His skin stretched too tight over the bone underneath, mouth open and working at something that wasn't words yet. His eyes found the nearest warm thing in the room, which was Salinas standing right there over him, and his hands came up and took hold of Salinas by the coat with a grip that didn't look like it belonged to anything that frail. Salinas screamed. It wasn't a sound I expected out of him. It didn't have any of that calm left in it. And then the other 7 chambers started rattling on their brackets, one after another, left to right down the wall, like dominoes falling the slow way. I watched the readouts spike behind their glass, one after the next, heartbeats climbing in sequence, the whole room filling up with the sound of metal under strain and air hissing out of fittings that weren't built to hold what was happening to them. And under all of that, low, was a sound that wasn't any machine. I'm not going to try and describe it past that. Eli grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a mark and hauled me toward the door, and I went. The 2 security men who'd been posted outside were already running, not toward the building but away from it, scattering out across the yard like quail. We came out into the dark, and the cold air hit different than the building's cold had. It had room to move in it, and Eli already had his phone out, thumb shaking so bad he had to try twice to get the numbers right. 911, I need... His voice cracked clean in half. Harwick Ranch. It's off Farm to Market 1631. The Caliche Road. There's no street number. Just tell them the Caliche Road off 1631. I took the phone out of his hand. He let me. This is Tyler Scott, I said. I'm at Harwick Ranch, off FM 1631, the Caliche Road with no name on it. There's a man named Johnny Salinas who's got 8 people in steel chambers in a cold storage building on this property, and he's just opened one of them up, and it's gone bad. The company's called Paragon Biopreservation. Before this property got sold, the legal contact was Donnell and Associates. Out of Fredericksburg, they'll have records on the estate. The dispatcher's voice came back even and asked me to stay on the line, said units were already being routed. I'll stay, I said, and I did. I stood there in the driveway with that phone against my ear and Eli breathing hard beside me and the security men nowhere in sight anymore, and behind me, through the closed door of that building, I could hear metal hitting metal, and a voice that wasn't Salinas's, raw and wordless, and then something give way deep inside the structure of the place, a groan that came up through the ground as much as through the air. Then the cold storage building went silent behind me, all at once, and I stood in the driveway with the dispatcher still on the line and the quiet spreading out across the dark pasture. The lights came up the Caliche Road before I heard the engine, a wash of red and blue swinging across the cedar and catching on the cottage windows, and then the cruiser itself, kicking dust, slowing at the gate where I stood with the phone still warm in my hand, and Eli somewhere behind me breathing like a man who'd run further than he had. The deputy got out slow, the way they're trained to, one hand near his belt without being on anything, and I didn't wait for him to ask me a single question. There's a forged receipt sitting on the kitchen table in that house, I said. Got my name on it, signature's not mine, and there's a folder of photographs to go with it making it look like I sold a stolen cattle trailer down in Kerrville. I want that documented before anybody so much as breathes on it. Kerr County's got a case number on it already. Nathan Carter said it to my face like a threat, so somebody up there can pull it. Document the receipt first. That's the one thing I need you to hear before anything else. He looked at me for a second like he didn't yet know whether I was a witness or the thing they'd come for. And then he said he heard me and got on his radio, and more lights started coming up that road behind him before he'd even finished saying it. I gave it all standing right there in the driveway because nobody told me to sit down and nobody told me not to talk, and I wasn't going to leave a single piece of it for somebody else to lay out wrong. I named Nathan Carter and what he'd said on that kitchen table. The photographs time-stamped at the Kerrville auction, my truck and trailer in them, the receipt with somebody else's hand pretending to be mine, a witness statement I'd never given to a witness I'd never met. I named Johnny Salinas and the company, Paragon Biopreservation, and I said the word volunteers the way he'd said it to me, because that was the word on the contracts, even if it wasn't the word for what I saw. I told them about the building, the 8 steel chambers lined up like something out of a meat locker, the readouts ticking along slow and steady until they weren't, the compound Salinas put into that injection port with his own hand, narrating it like a man giving a tour. I told them about the lid blowing off its bolts and what came up out of it reaching for the first warm thing it found. I said Eli Johnson's name, said he was the one who came to my door at midnight and the one who called this in before I ever touched the phone. Somewhere in the middle of it, I thought about Donald, asleep 40 minutes away outside Fredericksburg, and how his phone was going to start ringing before the sun came up, and how none of what he was about to hear was going to sound good for me. Broke caretaker, dead man's land, a missing trailer with my own truck in the picture. I said that part out loud too, before any of them could say it for me. A second deputy went to the cold storage building while I was still talking. I watched him cross the yard with his flashlight low, watched him push the door open, and watched him come back out faster than he went in. He didn't go back inside. He didn't look at any of us standing in the driveway. He just got on his radio, and his voice when it carried wasn't loud, but it had a flatness to it I recognized from men who've just seen something they don't have a box to put away yet. Nobody cuffed me. Nobody told me I could go either. The deputy I'd met at the gate walked me to his unit and opened the back door and left it open, and I sat down in it because there wasn't anywhere better to be. More units came up the road after that, then vehicles with no markings on them at all, sliding in quiet behind the lit-up ones. And Eli was over near the gate sitting on the ground with his knees up, and a deputy crouched down talking to him low, and from where I sat I couldn't hear the words, only the shape of a young man finally saying all of it out loud to somebody whose job it was to listen. The building sat dark now, no hum in it. No generator note underneath everything the way there'd been every night since they trucked those generators up that road. No light showing in any of the porthole windows. 340 yards from where I sat. Same as it had always been. Same distance I'd walked it the first week with nobody watching and nothing in there yet, but a name on a probate order and a sound I couldn't place. I thought about Gerald Harwick, a man I never met, dying alone on this place 18 months before I ever set foot on it, having signed over the rest of his money and his last years to whatever this was. I didn't bury what I'd found. The road kept filling. More lights, more doors, more low voices moving back and forth across that yard. I sat in the back of that cruiser with the door standing open beside me, not asked to close it, not told to step out. And I kept my eyes on that building the whole time, dark and quiet, and I did not look away from it.